Spelman Evans Downer here, back at the Yucca Valley Art Center at my show, Abstracted Directions. I'm going to talk about stock charts, one of the new directions. It's not entirely new, but I've been concentrating on it more recently, is using stock charts to make paintings. One of the things I'm trying to do with my work is come up with subjects that are important. Wars in Ukraine, music, I find music important. The city of Los Angeles, I find that important. Finance, I find finance very important. And I love to follow the world of business from a stock charting perspective. This probably goes back to my time when I lived in New York, and I actually took a class in what's called technical analysis. And ever since, I've been fascinated by stock charts. I think I mentioned in the first segment of this series that I check the situation on the battleground in Ukraine almost every day. And I do the same with the stock market. I look almost every day, certainly during the week. I do have some positions, but I'm just intellectually curious about American business, about technology, about blue chip old companies, about business models, about finance, about inflation, about the price of a barrel of oil. So I have followed it for many, many years, and now I'm making charts. The way I make them goes back to my aspect of photorealism. I explained in the beginning of this series that I would photograph a map or a satellite image and I would project it. Then I could trace it accurately, and I would still have to paint it, most likely in a very expressionistic manner. I'm doing the same thing with stock charts. I'm not so much using slide projectors anymore, but I print out a chart on office paper. Then I take a clear overlay and I trace the basic chart pattern so that it's reasonably accurate. It's not down to every single day or every single hour, but the large aspects of the price are relatively accurate. I find that's what's interesting. So I have it traced onto a clear sheet, then I put it in an overhead projector, then I project it. Let me start with this very first chart. I find this particularly fascinating. This is the 76-year chart of the price of a barrel of oil from 1946 to last year. So if this is 1946, this is right after the end of World War II. And it rises and then it trends lower and lower for like 2 decades. This is when Americans had really cheap gas, back when it was 20 cents, 30 cents a gallon. This is the Iran oil embargo, and the price shot up markedly. And then there was a further Iranian revolution, and the price of oil spiked to an all-time high. And then it trended down, it came back up, and it trended down. And then this is the last 20 years or so. I find this one particularly interesting. This was 2020, I believe. Now, if you look at this and you understand stock charts, the price of a gallon fairly recently, what was it, $3 or something? Well, if you put the inflation adjustment in, now if this chart is made non-inflation adjusted, it looks completely different. It just keeps going higher and higher and higher, and yes, there's pullbacks. But when you realize inflation is also a portion of the situation, and right now we have major inflation, and it turns out the price of gas is one of the biggest components of inflation. Anyway, I found that fascinating that we had some of the cheapest gas we'll probably have in the rest of our lifetimes, and now it's moving back to its old high. Up in the sky or the background, I put a lot of squiggles, deformities, and things going on. That's supposed to represent the analysts, or as I sometimes call them, the analysts. If you follow the stock market, there's always somebody with an opinion, and they're always saying something about this or that. And most of the time, they're full of BS, or they're hoping, or they're making it up, or they're trying to impress you. And there's a lot of noise in the background, so that's kind of what I'm doing here. There's also a lot of noise down in the bottom. The glitter is now data points and analyst opinions. So that's what's happening with the stock charts. These are some small ones. This is just a basic chart pattern. Spike down and then recover. In fact, that's what it's called. This is called NASDAQ COVID. We had the big COVID downturn, and then the NASDAQ turned higher and higher and higher, which seemed to me a bit of a puzzlement, and now we're suffering the consequences. Over here is a fascinating long-term winner. This is AAPL. That is the ticker symbol for Apple Computer. If it's 4 characters, you know it's on the NASDAQ. If it's 3 characters, it's generally on the New York Stock Exchange. Apple came out, this is called AAPL All Data, up until spring of last year. If you know the history of the corporation, a lot of it's embedded in the stock price, and that's one of the things I find fascinating. This, as I understand it, was their first Super Bowl ad, and they had a big spike up. And then it came back, and then it rolled even higher. This is what was called Black Friday, the big tech downturn. And then it moved sideways and lower, and this is the internet.com boom. It spiked higher. These are spikes going higher. You get spikes going higher, spikes going lower. And then it went way, way down again, and then it's recovered. And over the last 20 years, it's been on a major move. I hopefully would not have to explain to people Apple's products and how popular they are and how much money they're making. And that is reflected in the share price of what investors are willing to pay for a share of Apple Computer. I don't know how many stock splits are in this one. I think it's 7 or 8. There's a lot of history, a lot of information, and that's one of my interests with all my work. I look at the history, the information, and I'm still trying to abstract it and show it in a visual way. So let's see, just a couple of last ones. This actually is the very earliest. I did this when I was in New York, and I called this one From Maps to Charts. It was the first time I painted charts. This is actually the internet peak right here. And then you can see an earlier peak here, and it pulled back, and then it went high. And this was the old high for the NASDAQ. It took about 20 years for it to get back and go higher. And that was an important piece. But I kind of left it there, and I really wasn't doing it so actively, but I've always been fascinated, so it's kind of neat. I basically, since I'm always following the market, I put a folder of companies that are of interest, and I follow those. This is Bitcoin. I call this one Bitcoin Bounce. This is Ether. This also is a cryptocurrency. So it's fun to chart that. It's been going lower and lower. They're all a snapshot in time. This oil went higher and came back, and I think it's back up to its all-time high. Apple is pulled back quite a bit, but not as much as a lot of stocks. So embedded in these paintings are snapshots of history and information about corporations and commodities and all of that. So that's the stock chart work that I'm doing at this point, and I imagine it will continue.